Welcome to the new series of the FODcast. In this series, we'll be talking all things composable. Composable isn't a new thing anymore. In fact, many end customers have had a composable element for some time now, with some companies often upgrading their CMS along with other functionality within the CX ecosystem for something that we would now refer to as best of breed to suit customer needs. However, over the last 18 to 24 months, we have seen a real increase in companies moving away from the traditional monolith and going best of breed across their CX ecosystem. In this series, we're looking to really get under the hood of those that have been there, done it, and got the t-shirt. No two composable transformations are the same. It's important. So it's so important that not only you, but the business is ready for the change, as this is often overlooked. If you're an end customer, either considering or going through this transformation, then this series is for you. This brings me on to my first guest. I'm pleased to welcome Anjali Subburaj. Anjali and I only crossed paths recently. However, after being a MACH Ambassador since 2020, I'd say she's pretty well placed in helping you understand what needs to be done to prepare for a successful business transformation. Over to you, Anjali. Can you give the audience a quick overview of your background?
Thank you, James, and hello to everyone. Thank you for inviting me to this podcast series. It's always a privilege and pleasure to share my thoughts on all things composable and all things MACH. So as you rightfully said, James, composable has been there around for a while, but the movement gained momentum in 2020, and both composable and MACH go hand in hand. How I came across MACH was when I was in 2020, I was working for Mars. I joined Mars, the CPG giant, to shape their direct-to-consumer strategy. Mars is traditionally a B2B business, and they were newly getting into direct-to-consumer area. And Mars is, and I was tasked to find a technology solution that would fit Mars's overall D2C strategy. Mars is a very complex business. There are businesses within business, and it's a CPG also has a different business model. So it was a real challenge to find a solution that would be flexible enough to fit all the businesses that sit under Mars, and also the CPG model that CPG model of business that Mars has. So I looked at the traditional solutions, which I was very familiar with. I'm still familiar with them, but they didn't align with Mars's business strategy. So I came across MACH, which was quite new then, and I found it to be a good fit for Mars's direct-to-consumer strategy. MACH Alliance got formed in 2020, and then the founding members invited me to join the Alliance as their ambassador, and I happily accepted that. So since then, I've been MACH Alliance ambassador, and this year I have the honor of being part of their advisory board member as well.
Nice. That's really cool. Obviously, being part of the ambassadors for the MACH Alliance, a group that has really brought the whole composable piece to the forefront over the last couple of years. I guess what would be really good to know is what does being an ambassador entail?
So being an ambassador primarily means I advocate and champion the MACH principles. I also, having worked with end user organizations, I can bring a different perspective to the MACH movement, because MACH Alliance is formed of the MACH product vendors and MACH service providers. But there is a third important element to the whole MACH movement, which is the end user customers. So who are going to implement the MACH technology. So ambassadors represent primarily that group, and they bring in the thought leadership from end user perspective. So that has been my primary role, is to advocate and champion, also to advise customers who are considering embarking on the MACH journey. So I do that as well. And the third, as I said, also advising the MACH product vendors and service providers about how to improve their products and services to be more useful to the end user organizations.
No, so that certainly puts you very well placed to have this conversation today. As I said at the start, we're going to be focusing uh, very much on the business elements of a composable transformation. And like I said, if you are a business that is either going through or considering going through a composable transformation, it is a lot to get your head around. So make sure you stay tuned and listen to what Anjali has to say. She's certainly been there, done it, and in this case has the t-shirt to show from her time with Mars especially, but also some of the other consulting gigs that you've held beforehand, alongside that and beforehand. So look, Anjali, I think I guess let's get things started and kick off with the first question. So what is one of the biggest challenges that you faced at your time with Mars?
I think, as I said, in the MACH movement and the composable movement itself gained momentum in 2020. It was very new. It was considered emerging technologies at that point of time. So positioning that, explaining to the various stakeholders within Mars, I found that quite challenging because in my head, the solution was clear. I had done my due diligence and research, but articulating it and answering questions from the stakeholders, especially on something that is emerging, that was the biggest challenge that I faced then.
Okay. I can imagine, given the new element to it and the size of business that Mars is, I would expect quite a lot of traditional methods to be involved from some of the stakeholders. So how did they generally perceive it?
Initially, as I said, there were a lot of concerns and they were all well-founded because this was a new technology and it's a risky venture. So there were a lot of concerns and raised, but I also found a lot of stakeholders to be quite open-minded. And I remember a conversation I had with one of the business leaders who asked me point blankly, isn't this very risky for Mars? And are we ready for this yet? Those were his two questions. In terms of being readiness, I said, if we are going to do direct to consumer, we have to raise our bar because B2B business model and how you operate technology strategy and operate it for B2B is very different to how you do it for direct to consumer. So you have to raise your bar for direct to consumer anyway. And going with some kind of a forward-looking technology, that means you're leapfrogging and making your technology strategy future-proof. So raising the bar of the organization as a whole to direct to consumer, and then also making sure that you're future ready rather than having to reinvent the wheel 2 or 3 years down the line. I think that sort of clicked with the stakeholders. And they also asked around and spoke with early adopters of these technologies and then decided to go MACH.
Okay. So I'd imagine from a technology point of view, then especially there's probably going to be a reasonable amount of change required from the business to be technology led and to looking at best of breed for those areas. How did they go around that transition? And was the composable transformation something that they led internally?
It was the initial setting up was all internally done, and Mars is, you use the word technology led. I don't think any business is either technology led or business led. It was a collaborative effort between the business and technology to do the technology selection, to onboard the vendors. It was always a joint venture between business and technology. And after setting up, after doing the technology selection, onboarding some of the service providers, then I think they were driving it as opposed to the internal team.
Okay, and you make a fair point there actually with the technology-led comment from myself. I think it's really important from the conversations that I've been having anyway, is that when you are picking the technologies that you deem best for the business, it is an entire business conversation and not just one that's focused on the technologies themselves. So moving on then. I think something that would be really useful and interesting for the audience to hear is 3 tips that you would share on for any company that are going through that composable transformation.
Yes, I would be happy to. It's difficult to select top three, but I'll try my best. So based on my experience with Mars and my subsequent experience, I think like any digital transformation, Composable is not an exception, as I said. And the first step is to stay business focused. Having a strong business use case, stakeholder management, right from the beginning to the end of the delivery, it's important. Keeping the business users engaged is important. So the business focus and business engagement is important. The second tip I would talk about is technology. And this is no doubt, like you alluded to, that it is technical. It's more technical in nature compared to other digital transformation. You're bringing in not just one, but many new technologies into your organization, and you have to marry them with some of your existing enterprise systems and legacy technology that you have. So there is a lot of choice, there is a lot of flexibility, that you have a lot of freedom, but with flexibility and freedom comes complexity and responsibility. So I think the technology teams within an end user organization have to learn and make informed decisions and take ownership of their own solution. The whole is bigger than sum of parts, as they say. So that's my second tip for the technology teams: make informed decisions. And the third is for the program management. This is a digital transformation initiative. So use some kind of a framework, something like scaled agile framework, which is much more suitable for this kind of initiative, as opposed to saying, we'll just do it in an agile manner. That means we will see where it goes. You might find that you get into trouble a little down the line. So right from the beginning, work within a framework.
Okay.
So those are the three top tips.
Nice. Well, I think there's certainly three good tips, and I think if we speak about the second one in a little bit more detail, I think that would be quite good, because, as you mentioned, there is a lot of different technology that can be involved in these composable transformations, and I guess the list of vendors that are forming part of the MACH Alliance is also growing on a monthly basis. From your point of view, how should the business decide which vendors that they should work with for different parts of the ecosystem?
So I think when you are starting, you're looking to bring in probably 3 to 5 vendors in your composable solution to begin with, new vendors. Having a criteria. So first of all, you need your business requirements, not though it is composable and direct to consumer. It may seem that everybody will have same requirements, and that's not true. The devil is in the detail. So have some kind of a business brief and business requirements together. So that becomes your first set of selection criteria. The second set of selection criteria is about how is it going to fit into your overall technology strategy. Does your enterprise architecture have any guidelines that you need to, something like security and compliance regulations, etc. Those things also matter. And so having that set of criteria is important. And third is, I think it is, there is also other type of governance in any organization. For example, Mars had a lot of strict governance around commercial, legal, and so on. So you need to have those criteria also laid out very clearly. And once you have these 3 sets of criteria, then you can go and select vendors based against these criteria.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. And I guess on outside of the vendors, you then have to look at the agencies that often are responsible for delivering these transformations, and that there's no 2 composable transformations that are the same due to the amount of different technologies that can be involved. So would be quite interesting to know is how you would go around selecting your agency. Would you look for one that's able to deliver across as much of it as possible, or would you try and get specific agencies in to deliver across specific parts and work together? Or maybe a big consultancy firm to take ownership and then work with some more boutique agencies underneath them? What do you feel would work best?
I think every organization works differently and they adopt their own model. But typically what I've seen is that having 2 to 3 vendors managing 2 to 3 different parts of the solution works well. While, for example, somebody looking at your CMS strategy, content and market, it's very marketing and business user focused. So doing that, somebody doing the technical part of your solution, like doing the integrations and with your backend systems and so on. So that could be another vendor. The third could be looking at your data strategy and so on. So typically 2 to 3 vendors who have experience and expertise in that area, they come together. You also have to realize some of your traditional non-Mac vendors. So have 2 to 3 niche Mac vendors and have maybe 1 or 2 who are doing your enterprise architecture and integrating it with your Mac architecture and so on. And I think the important difference between how you do monolithic-based digital transformation and composable is normally in monolith, you can outsource everything. You can outsource, give it to one agency and they will take care of everything because it is all centered around that monolith. But composable is into different pieces. And I go back to the point, who owns the whole? So every agency that you onboard, they will look at their area, but somebody needs to take ownership of the entire solution, entire architecture and delivering of that. And that, I think, lies with the end user organization. So end user organization, technology teams play a big part in building and maintaining a composable solution.
Okay, so a real big focus then on the end user having that ownership and accountability for the overall transformation. Okay, well, look, recently when I've been speaking sort of composable to some businesses, I've been met with a phrase that goes along the lines of, we'd like a Ferrari, but we only need a Ford. So what I take from that is, whilst they feel like composable would be very nice for them, actually they're more than capable in just by getting by with a standard sort of monolith type platform. So I guess that leads me on to the question as to, from your point of view, is there or what are the businesses that you feel would be exempt from making the move composable?
So I think small businesses, something like those who have revenue less than 50 million at the very least.
Okay.
I would exempt them. Those who don't have digital teams, like have few hundred employees, then I don't think they should go for composable, but it needs more. They don't have enough ROI into that. Those who don't have digital maturity, they should not go for it because, as I said, you are going to own the entire solution. But beyond that, I think composable is as complex and convoluted that you want to make, but you can keep it simple. You can just bring the minimum, you can build a minimum viable product out of composable. So I've seen some medium-sized businesses who have the right digital maturity going for composable and building out their composable solution. So it is possible, but the 2 important factors are that you need to have enough ROI. That's something that you have to decide upfront. And second is you need to have digital maturity to take on something like composable. So even if you have enough ROI, but if you don't have in-house digital maturity, you should not go for it.
Okay, so it seems like the in-house digital maturity is going to be quite a key differentiator then when it comes to should you consider going down the composable route or not. Just for clarity there, you spoke about medium-sized businesses. In your opinion, what would you classify as a medium-sized business?
I would classify medium-sized business going from few hundred million, maybe touching up to 1 billion revenue.
Okay.
And maybe a couple of thousand employee count. But I think the number of employees doesn't matter. It is that digital maturity. That's the key factor for me.
Okay. Awesome. No, that's a really good point. So thank you. So moving on to the next question then. What would you see as the biggest upside for any business that if they were to move to a fully composable setup?
I always lead with the best business benefit, and the biggest business benefit in Composable for me is that end user organization can provide seamless omni-channel experience to their consumers. What does that mean is the consumers are quite digital savvy now. There are many digital touch points with which they interact with their organizations, or they want to. And we know about web, mobile, and in-store are the main touch points where consumers interact with end user organizations. But there are other channels also that are coming up, like you have voice commerce, smart devices, social commerce, and perhaps a few more coming down the line. All these channels, consumers can interact with an end user organization, and they expect to have seamless experience. It should not be driven by which channel they are connecting with the end user organization. So these are the channels which we call experiences, or let me call them heads. There are many heads. And you need a body, a consolidated, a single body of data and business logic to drive all these heads. Composable gives you that consolidated body of data and business logic to drive all the heads seamlessly, delivering seamless experience to the consumer, regardless of the channel through which they choose to interact with the end user organization. So for me, that is the biggest upside. The second upside we spoke about a little bit earlier is not working with the monolith and working with 5 or 6 vendors. That means you are avoiding a vendor lock-in, which can become quite challenging after a period of time for an organization. So you get that flexibility and freedom to choose your vendors as you wish to, not just now, but in the future also.
Yeah, that certainly seems to be one of the more common upsides that I hear in conversations is the ability to take best of breed vendor to suit your business demands, which often change as well. How your business is now is probably going to be different to how it's going to be into 2 years. And if you are locked into your SAPs or your Salesforces as a monolith as part of the bigger picture, then it can be tough to move on, not only from a cost point of view, but also from the fact that your whole business is set up on SAP. So then to start chopping and changing it is going to be very tough. It's going to be time consuming and probably quite costly as well. So having that ability is certainly one of the more common things that I'm told as to why Composable is going to be the right approach for retailers moving forward.
That's right. It's having that freedom, having the freedom also to evolve as the situation around you changes, because it's not just about cost, etc. If you get yourself locked into a platform, then that platform is not going to change as much, but the world around you is changing, and you want to change as the consumer needs change, and which is becoming quite unpredictable now because the world around the consumers is changing.
Definitely. Yeah, that's it. We're seeing how fast paced that whole environment is at the minute. Yes. So nice. Okay. Moving on to one of the final questions then. I guess something that I was speaking about with somebody only a couple of weeks ago now was how the whole microservices and composable element of commerce can actually be applied into the wider business. And a chap I was speaking to said that they see the ERP area as possibly the next big sort of composable type transformational piece. What's your thoughts on the applicability of composable architectures in areas outside of commerce?
So I think outside of commerce, there are 2 areas where I see MACH is an architecture principle, Composable is an architecture principle. It is not tied to commerce. So on that basis, I think I see 2 areas where MACH and Composable will get applied to. One is breaking down other monoliths like ERP, or also CRM, which were developed in a period where it was one-stop shop for customer relationship, one-stop shop for enterprise resource planning. But that's not the case now. So breaking down those monoliths as well will happen. There is a second area where I have seen MACH and Composable already being in place is something like financial services, healthcare, and utility services, which actually have a much bigger reach to the consumers compared to a single retailer. So these have these services or these industry sectors have their bespoke legacy solutions, which probably they can't get out of. But what they are doing is they are bringing in MACH elements or composable elements to sit on top of these legacy bespoke solutions that they have and serve their consumers. So I see that MACH coming in two places. One is to break down other monoliths like ERP and CRM, and also to embed itself in financial services, utility, healthcare, and so on.
Okay. And do you expect the period when it starts breaking down the monoliths around the CRMs and the ERPs, do you expect that to be a slightly easier piece, given it's already going to have done it in commerce and people are more familiar with how it works from a technology and a business point of view? Or do you expect some different challenges that they'll have to prepare for?
I think it's ERP could be more challenging than CRM. Or maybe I'm wrong. It's because how deeply it is embedded within the organization. The organization has a dependency on ERP. So bringing in a different philosophy in ERP might take a longer time as compared to something like commerce. There is also the impact on the business. Your impact on the business impact of something like breaking down a commerce platform is much more immediate and essential as compared to breaking down an ERP. So this will go down to how the CIOs of end user organization set their priorities. Business facing, consumer facing is always a priority compared to what impacts your back end.
Yeah, and I get, like you said, I guess the ERP ultimately holds it all together. So a much bigger conversation to be had, possibly with a lot more risk attached to it as well, if anything was to go wrong. Okay, so look, moving on to the final question then, we've seen a lot of change in the last 2 years as companies have started to adopt the composable piece, and the conversation, in my opinion, has changed from what is this to how do we do it? But what would be really interesting to know is what do you think is in store for the next 2 years?
I think, like you said, composable now, what is it and whether we should do it, that we have crossed that point, or at least there is a segment of the industry that has crossed that point, but it doesn't have full coverage yet. So diversification and expanding the composable MACH conversation that will happen. It's very much restricted to US and parts of Europe, but it needs to have more geographical coverage, cover other industry sectors. So that will happen. Personally, I would also like to see some governance and standardization in how to do MACH coming in. There is, of course, going to be a debate, because on one side, you want the flexibility. You don't want to be prescriptive. But on other side, too much flexibility can create confusion and you might not get optimum results. So I would like to see some guidance coming in how to do MACH. So those are the two areas that I see growth happening in composable commerce, definitely. And of course, we talked about composable and MACH spreading into other areas, which will actually help stabilize composable commerce movement.
Do you see some of that happening in the next couple of years then?
I think it's already happening. The conversations have started. And I'm fortunate to be on the judging panel of National Technology Awards for this year. And I've already seen MACH and composable being used in other areas, like I said, utility and financial services. So I think these things are already happening, but it's about bringing all of them to the same platform or standardizing and developing some kind of structured and coordinated thought leadership. And last but not least, I'm also curious to see how the whole AI movement that is happening going to impact MACH. not MACH and Composable. It will definitely come in. It will come in delivering better consumer functionality, business functionality, but it will also, I'm looking forward to AI also helping reduce the complexity in building the architecture as well as operating and maintaining it. So something like AI ops is something my favorite. I would look forward to that.
Okay, AI ops.
Yes.
Okay, well, we heard it here first then, I guess. Let's see what the next 2 years holds for AI ops. I certainly feel that the whole artificial intelligence space there's going to be so much happening within that area over the next couple of years. I mean, we're really just scratching the surface on what it's capable of, and we're seeing some huge advancements in it every couple of months. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that develops as an overall over the next couple of years. But yeah, we'll keep our eyes peeled for AI ops, and maybe we can revert back to this podcast in a couple of years and see how it's held back.
Yeah, AI ops is coming. It's a matter of now time, and it will help everybody take out all this complexity and the hurdles. It will be beneficial and focus more on the business functionality as opposed to keeping the lights on.
Right. Well, let's see. I'm looking forward to seeing how that develops. But look, really appreciate your time on the podcast today, Anjali. I think we've covered some really good topics on what end customers can expect from this sort of transformation, and but more importantly, some areas that they should really be looking into if they are going to go along this journey, just to make sure they can avoid some pitfalls, because it is still fairly new and it is very different to maybe what companies have experienced before via way of a monolith platform. And there's different things that businesses would need to take into account in order to get a successful implementation. But I think one of the key things that you mentioned at the start is making sure the business takes ownership of the transformation. Is going to be one of the really essential things to set you up for a successful implementation. But I hope the listeners have enjoyed. As always, if you've got any questions or anything and you want to get in touch following the session, I'm sure Anjali will be more than happy to share thoughts where possible. And equally, feel free to get in touch with myself and Simply Commerce team, and we'll be happy to help where we can. Until the next time, have a great day.
Thank you, James.